My arms and armor reviews have been almost exclusively on swords, and that's mostly because I'm a sword collector, and I certainly have many other medieval weapons and eventually armor that I would love to review, but I really like talking about swords. And while I had something else entirely planned for today's video, well, I had to change it up at the last minute. And I won't go too much into detail about what happened, but it was definitely a spectacular failure, so I'm really scrambling for a new topic. Thankfully, I have a great, perfect item to bring up today, and that's mostly because I just picked it up last week, and I've been kind of actually waiting to do this one for a long time because I've been keeping my eye on it. And it's certainly not a sword. In fact, it's much smaller, and it's something of an assassin's weapon, something that is very small, very subtle, and no less deadly than a sword. So you're probably wondering what that could be. Well, that would be a stiletto. The dominant theme of the Renaissance is the rediscovery, or rather a rebirth, of European interest in classical culture, art, and learning. Art and themes harkening back to Rome and Greece were very much in vogue. This was not only evident in the grand architecture and art that were iconic to the period, but also in the smaller, everyday objects that the well-heeled would use. This dagger is in keeping with the Renaissance trend, with its hilt of sculpted figures and all-steel construction. It implies that its owner is a person of taste, learning and status such as a noble courtier, a councilman of the Italian city-states, or a lady of fine means. Not simply a decorative sidearm, this stiletto is much deadlier than its slender blade and elegant form imply. The blade causes a grievous, triangular puncture wound that are exceptionally difficult to treat, even by the standards of modern surgeons. This 16th century Courtier Stiletto has an unsharpened blade of high carbon steel. The tip, however, is fairly sharp due to the geometry. The hilt is likewise of steel that has been antique finished. It comes with a leather scabbard that has an antiqued steel throat and chape. These are the specifications of the stiletto. If there was one thing that drew me to this particular stiletto, it was its looks, its aesthetics. There are a lot of different stilettos out there, and I knew I wanted one, and I kept searching for the one that I really thought was the type that I would really enjoy. And kind of harkening to a lot of the concepts of the focus on art in the Renaissance period, everything being a lot more decorative, well, this stiletto really kind of fit that bill. And it's a very, very strange look to it. It has these little figures on it that are holding each other up or standing at right angles. And they're really basic. They're not incredibly detailed, but they do look like something that may have been molded by, a Renaissance silversmith or someone like that. And so I actually really quite like the very basic design. And the blade specifically being a triangular blade in the stiletto, which is pretty common of most stilettos, I thought also looked very nice, fit the overall design very well. And so it's kind of this weird blend between a very lethal small dagger and something that aesthetically is almost treated like so many other things in the Renaissance, beginning to be overly ornate for really almost no reason sometimes, but certainly not for the purposes of functionality. And this it's a very, very basic stiletto. There's not a lot to it besides the molding. I do like that it's all kind of almost the same color across. It's all a high carbon steel, but the handle portion has been slightly antique to have a slightly different color, not much. But it all looks like kind of one good, solid little piece that all in all looks really nice, and I think that's what really drew this particular one to me. There's so many out there, like I said, but this one in particular, I just really like the way it looked. This is one of those few cases where functionality is, well, not a lot to talk about. This is a high carbon steel dagger, so it has what maybe could be considered flex, although because of the triangular blade, it's really not going to flex much. The design of it, of course, is meant to to puncture. And so in talking about functionality, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the things that this particular dagger was actually trying to bypass, more namely defenses, as well as the ability for it to remain hidden. So the stiletto has something of a reputation of being an assassin's blade, and part of it really has to come down to a lot of the concerns that were still present in the Renaissance age. Even though in general it was becoming a less violent period, there was still the possibility of violence in the streets, and certainly for things such as political assassinations. And so really what it comes down to with a stiletto is actually this triangular blade. And the reason for that, as I mentioned before, the puncture wound is something that is hard to close up, for a surgeon to close up. But there's also an extra feature to it, as it were. And that really comes down to chainmail. So one of the kind of hidden rumors, as it were, things that you kind of hear a lot, and I don't know there's a lot to substantiate it, but I've heard it many times from many sources, is that noble people who were worried about assassination, worried about somebody coming up with a pretty standard dagger and trying to stab them, would begin to sew basic chainmail into the lining of their clothes. So it looked like regular cloth, like their standard jerkins or doublets or robes or whatever they're wearing. But if someone tried to stab them with a standard dagger, well, it actually would catch in that chainmail, wouldn't really puncture through. But the amazing thing about a triangular blade, and I'll actually represent this to some extent with this piece of chainmail that I have, is actually how well it can actually pierce chainmail. Now this is steel. This is a galvanized steel, and it's butted chainmail, so it doesn't have the riveting that most historical chainmail would actually have. But the point, no pun intended, still very much stands. And so I'll show you how this works. So if you were to have a single layer of chainmail sewn into your clothing, and someone came at you with a standard dagger, it would stop. But a stiletto, as you can see, it's at least getting a little more than an inch through the chainmail, right there. And because this is butted chainmail, this is going to be a lot easier for me, but even riveted chainmail would have this problem. That is with no force, right there. But if I apply force, I can get all the way through. And that's because it actually begins to deform and separate the rings, and you can actually basically see what is done to this ring. Very, very small ring, but it got deformed. And even if it was riveted or even a punched ring is what you would see in a lot of chainmail that's historically accurate, even those wouldn't be able to withstand the force that's being applied in 3 different directions by a triangular blade. And so the stiletto was essentially designed to solve the defensive problem, as it were, that an assassin might come up across, because they want to be able to kill the person they're going after, but if that person is wearing chainmail underneath their clothing, not a lot's going to get through, and that person will probably walk away. But with this, it's very easy to get through. And so when you speak about functionality for this, it's a lot more basic. You know, there's not a lot of cut tests I can do or anything. I just showed you pretty much the only test that's really going to be a useful test. It can pierce, and this is extremely sharp. This would easily go through just about anything. So yeah, functionality wise, this is exactly as it would need to be absolutely lethal. It's a really fascinating kind of facet of history, especially the Renaissance period, and what really came about to make this specific type of dagger what it is. All in all, I'm actually extremely happy with this stiletto. I love stilettos, and I think it's mostly because my background of having spent nearly a decade making things out of chainmail. I was always very aware of the kind of legends behind the stiletto and chainmail and how that was supposed to have interacted from a historical standpoint. Whether or not it's actually true is really hard to know, but it was certainly something I was always aware of, and so I always had a little bit of respect for the stiletto. And I wanted one that really captured not just the functionality but also the Renaissance period. As people who watch my videos know, I always like to have something that's not just functional but is also representative of the culture and the time. And I think this one really fits that bill. The statuesque design of the hilt is really extremely well done, if albeit a little bit basic. And I really think that you can't find many better stilettos out there in terms of reproduction form. And I'm really, really happy with this one. I actually highly recommend it. I think it's well worth the cost, even though the price tag may seem a little bit high at face value. Once you have a chance of actually holding this in your hand and being able to appreciate the art that kind of went into it, I think it's really well worth the price. This is the Windlass Steelcraft's Italian Courtier Stiletto, and I give it a 4 out of 5.